I clocked out on time for the first time in 12 years. No late emails, no staying after hours, no covering for anyone else. Just punched out, grabbed my jacket, and walked to my truck. My boss had told me that morning I wasn't ready for the promotion. I nodded, said nothing, and went home. 2 days later, the plant was in chaos, and my phone showed 86 missed calls from the shop. My name is Ryan Collins, 40 years old, senior shift supervisor at the largest manufacturing plant in northern Indiana. I'd been there since I was 21. I knew every machine, every line, every system. I trained half the men who ran the floor. And for more than a decade, I kept that place running like clockwork. No one had to tell me I was good at my job. The numbers spoke for themselves. But management wasn't interested in numbers. They wanted compliance. They wanted quiet loyalty, not the kind that comes with results, but the kind that bends to every order. That morning, in his office, my boss Daniel leaned back in his leather chair and told me with a smirk that I wasn't ready for the promotion to plant manager. 17 years of work. Nights, weekends, double shifts. And his words were simple. Not ready. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I just nodded once, stood up, and left. Because I already knew the truth. I wasn't just ready for that promotion. I'd been running the plant without the title for years. What Daniel didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment. Quietly, methodically. I had all the logs. Every maintenance schedule. Every production record. Every time a safety check had been skipped, and every time Daniel had signed off on it. I kept the records not because I planned to use them, but because I knew someday someone would try to erase my work and take the credit. And when that day came, I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let silence do the work. That night, I went home on time. My wife, Melissa, looked surprised to see me before dark. Dinner was still on the stove. My teenage son barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. I sat at the table, calm, steady, like nothing had changed. But inside, something shifted. The part of me that had carried the plan on my shoulders was done. Let Daniel prove he could run it without me. 2 days later, the calls started. At first, just one or two. Then dozens. The kind of desperate string of calls you only make when the entire system is falling apart. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. Without my oversight, the plant wasn't a machine. It was a grenade with the pin pulled. By the time I finally looked at my phone, there were 86 missed calls. I set it face down on the table and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing down on me. No panic. No fear of what was coming. Just a cold certainty. They thought I wasn't ready. They were about to find out exactly how ready I'd been all along. When I didn't show up the next day, nobody said a word. Not at first. They assumed I'd still do what I'd always done. Pick up the slack, cover the mistakes, run the place in silence. But I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to hold the plant together for free anymore. I wasn't going to fight for a title or beg for recognition. I was going to let Daniel feel what the job really required. I kept my routine clean. Wake up, drink my coffee, read the news, take my son to school. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I wasn't checking the plant's production systems, not like I used to every morning for years. Instead, I was organizing. I pulled up folders I'd been keeping quietly for over a decade. Maintenance logs with signatures missing. Safety audits where Daniel had skipped entire sections to meet deadlines. Messages from corporate asking questions he never answered honestly. And my own notes, detailed, time-stamped, every time I'd been told to let it slide. I hadn't realized how much I had collected until I saw it all laid out. Hundreds of files, enough to show exactly who had been running the plant and who hadn't. By the second day, Melissa asked if I was planning to go in. I told her no. She didn't push. She'd lived with me long enough to know when my mind was made up. My silence told her more than words ever could. That afternoon, my phone buzzed nonstop. Supervisors, line workers, even the union rep. 86 missed calls before I turned it off completely. I could imagine the chaos. Machines out of sync, orders behind schedule, production lines halted because no one had checked the maintenance logs. All the little fires I usually put out quietly were burning at the same time, and no one else knew where the water was kept. I didn't need to answer the calls. I didn't need to explain myself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. If I wasn't ready, then let them run it without me. That night, I logged into the private server I'd set up years ago. Not company property, my own system. Backups of everything I'd seen, saved under neutral names. I wasn't planning to leak anything. Not yet. But I knew one day I might need to protect myself. When Melissa came into the room, she looked at me carefully. "You seem calm," she said. I didn't reply. I just closed the laptop and shut off the light. Because calm was exactly what I wanted Daniel to see. Silence can be the loudest weapon. By the third morning, word had spread across town. A neighbor mentioned that trucks had been rerouted from the plant. A friend texted me that production orders were already delayed. And still, I stayed home. I had all the time in the world now. Daniel was the one running out of it. By the fourth morning, the silence had turned into noise. Not from me, but from them. My inbox was filling with desperate messages. The subject lines alone told the story: system failure, production halt, need guidance, emergency meeting. I didn't open them. I didn't have to. I knew exactly what was happening without reading a single word. The plant was designed to run on schedules, checklists, and protocols. But all of those lived in my head. For years, Daniel and corporate believed those systems were automated, that the software managed itself, that the younger supervisors could keep things going with clipboards and enthusiasm. The truth was, the plant ran because I never let it fall apart. I memorized every flaw, every shortcut, every corner that had been cut to save money. And now, all of it was breaking at once. I poured myself another coffee and walked outside. The air was cold, sharp enough to remind me I was free. I thought about all the nights I'd driven home with my chest tight, stomach knotted, worrying about the next shift, the next breakdown, the next impossible deadline. But that morning, my phone stayed in my pocket. Silent, heavy, useless. By noon, Melissa came in from running errands. She said she ran into a neighbor whose husband worked second shift. The plant had shut down 2 entire lines. Orders were backing up. Drivers were sitting in trucks with nothing to haul. Daniel had tried to rally the supervisors, but it wasn't working. Machines don't listen to pep talks. Later that evening, my son showed me a post on social media. Workers were complaining about forced overtime, management panic, rumors of lost contracts. Someone even mentioned Daniel pacing the floor like a man about to drown. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just stared at the screen and filed it away in my mind. Every fire they were fighting now was one I'd been putting out quietly for years. That night, I opened my laptop and started reviewing my records again. Not to update anything, just to remind myself of the weight I'd been carrying. Safety checks skipped under Daniel's signature. Maintenance schedules pushed back month after month. Training logs left blank for new hires who never got the knowledge they needed. It was all there, every detail, every careless choice. I didn't send the files to anyone. I didn't need to. The plan itself was telling the story now. Every missed shipment, every halted machine, every late order was proof of what I'd been holding together. Before I went to bed, I checked my phone one last time. 112 missed calls. Messages from numbers I didn't even recognize. I powered it off and set it face down on the nightstand. Silence again. My weapon. My shield. Daniel thought he could measure my worth by a title. Now the entire plant was measuring it for him. On the 5th day, I knew Daniel would crack. Not because I heard from him directly. He still hadn't found the nerve, but because corporate emails started showing up in my personal inbox. Somehow they got my private address. One message read, "Ryan, we'd like to schedule a conversation to understand recent events." Another said, "Your expertise is critical to ongoing operations." The tone had shifted. No longer dismissal. No longer arrogance. Now it was concern, almost pleading. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my own files again. This time, I began assembling them into a sequence, like a story only I could tell. Every skipped inspection, every forged signature, every falsified report, each one tied to Daniel. I wasn't planning to use it right away, but the more I organized, the more I realized how much power silence had given me. They were panicking in the dark, while I sat in the light with every piece of evidence. Melissa noticed me at the kitchen table late that night, papers spread across the surface. "What are you doing?" she asked. I told her I was just cleaning up old records. She didn't press further. She knew better than anyone that when I got quiet, I was working on something serious. Meanwhile, the plant's collapse was no longer a rumor. The local paper ran a story about delayed shipments costing the company contracts. A supplier I knew personally called me, asking if I could explain what was happening. I simply said I wasn't involved anymore. Let them wonder. Let the silence widen the cracks. By the sixth day, my former coworkers were sending longer, desperate messages. One supervisor admitted he hadn't slept in 3 nights trying to manage the chaos. Another said Daniel was blaming everyone but himself. And then, the one that made me pause. Ryan, the safety inspector is coming next week. None of the logs are updated. What do we do? That message told me everything. For years, I'd been their safety net. I'd kept the paperwork clean, the schedules current, the inspectors satisfied. Without me, the truth was spilling out in every corner. That evening, I backed up the entire archive of my records onto a single drive. I labeled it in plain letters, proof. Not for them, not yet. For me. A shield, in case Daniel tried to shift blame. If the plant collapsed completely, I wasn't going to be dragged down with it. As I slid the drive into a safe I'd kept locked for years, I felt the same calm I'd felt when I first walked out. This wasn't revenge. This was strategy. Daniel thought he could reduce me to silence. What he never understood was that silence wasn't weakness. It was control. The plant was breaking apart. Daniel was drowning. And I hadn't raised my voice once. By the 7th day, the calls stopped coming from the supervisors. They'd given up. Now it was corporate, direct. One voicemail said, "Ryan, this situation has escalated. Please call us immediately." Another was colder. Failure to cooperate could result in legal action. I let both expire in silence. They were threatening me now, but even their threats sounded desperate. That morning, I drove past the plant for the first time since I'd walked out. From the road, I could see trucks lined up outside the gates, engines idling, drivers leaning against their rigs. The lot was half empty, machines silent inside. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. But the image burned in my mind. Years of work undone in less than a week. Not because of my absence, but because of their arrogance. I spent the afternoon refining the file I'd labeled proof. I wasn't adding new information. I was sequencing it like a blueprint. Missed safety checks, falsified signatures, skipped maintenance, all laid out in order. Anyone reading it wouldn't just see isolated mistakes. They'd see a pattern, deliberate and undeniable. Daniel's pattern. Melissa brought me lunch and watched me quietly from across the table. "They'll have to face you eventually," she said. I didn't answer. She already knew my rule. No confrontation until the timing was perfect. Silence first. Evidence second. Then precision. That evening, news spread online. An industry outlet reported that our company's biggest contract had been suspended because of operational failures. The article mentioned millions in potential losses. And in the comment section, anonymous workers were blaming management. Some even mentioned Daniel by name. I didn't join the conversation. I didn't need to. The louder they shouted, the more effective my silence became. On the 8th day, a certified letter arrived. Corporate had escalated beyond calls and emails. Inside was an order demanding I return any proprietary information or company records in my possession. I sat at the table, reading the words carefully. They knew I had something. They just didn't know how much. I placed the letter in the same safe as the proof drive. Evidence, leverage, security, it all lived in one place now. I wasn't intimidated. If anything, their attempt at pressure told me I'd already won. That night, I powered on my phone long enough to see one new voicemail. Daniel's voice, raw and strained. "Ryan, listen, we need to talk. Please, just call me back." I deleted it without listening to the end. The pressure wasn't on me anymore. It was building entirely on them. The plant was breaking down, the contracts were slipping away, and Daniel had nowhere to hide. And through it all, I hadn't spoken a single word. On the 9th day, the silence ended with a knock at my door. Not a phone call, not an email, a personal visit. When I opened it, Daniel stood on my porch, pale and thinner than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loose, like he hadn't slept in days. He tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there and said, "Ryan, everything's falling apart. You have to help us." I didn't move. I let the weight of his words hang in the air. Then, without speaking, I closed the door. The sound of it shutting was louder than anything I could have said. Through the glass, I saw him hesitate, then leave without another word. That moment told me everything. Daniel wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't the man in the leather chair deciding who was ready for promotion. He was a desperate figure grasping at a silence he couldn't break. Later that day, Melissa found me in the garage, sitting at the workbench with the proof drive in my hand. She asked if I was planning to use it. I told her, in the calmest voice possible, that I would wait until Daniel forced my hand. She nodded once. She didn't argue. She knew patience was my weapon. The following morning, the local paper ran a front-page story. Manufacturing plant faces federal safety investigation. Inspectors had already been dispatched. Anonymous sources claimed years of falsified logs, skipped maintenance, and ignored warnings. Reading the words, I knew my silence had done its job. The truth was surfacing on its own. By noon, another certified letter arrived. This one wasn't threatening. It was pleading. Corporate requested an urgent consultation, offering compensation for my time. They didn't mention Daniel by name, but between the lines, I could see it. They were preparing to cut him loose. That evening, I received a single text message from an unknown number. It said, please, I'll resign. Just don't hand over the files. No signature, but I didn't need one. Only one man would write that. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed my phone back on the table, face down. Silence again. By the 10th day, the plant was no longer mine to worry about. Inspectors were inside. Contracts were gone. Workers were furious. And Daniel was finished. All I had done was step away. I realized then that I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to send the proof drive anywhere. The system he built was collapsing under its own weight. My silence had done what shouting never could. I wasn't the man not ready for promotion. I was the man who had already been running everything, and the world finally saw it. By the 11th day, the plant wasn't just in chaos. It was in free fall. News outlets picked up the story, calling it one of the worst operational collapses in the region in decades. Pictures showed trucks lined up with nowhere to go, workers standing outside smoking in groups, inspectors carrying clipboards through the main gate. The whole town could see what I had always known. The place never ran without me. I stayed home, drinking coffee at the same kitchen table where I'd once dragged myself half asleep to prepare for another long shift. My phone buzzed again, not with missed calls this time, but with messages from coworkers. Some were angry, blaming me for walking away. Others were apologetic, admitting they hadn't realized how much I carried. I didn't answer any of them. In the evening, Melissa slid a newspaper across the table toward me. The headline read, Plant Manager Resigns Amid Scandal. Daniel was finished, officially. The article quoted corporate saying they were committed to a full investigation and restructuring. It didn't mention me by name, but the story between the lines was clear. His downfall had been my silence. That night, I opened the safe and looked at the proof drive one last time. I didn't feel anger or triumph or even satisfaction. I felt something colder, heavier. Responsibility. I had the evidence that could bury Daniel for good or shield me if they tried to drag me into it. But I didn't need to send it anywhere. His own failures had already sealed his fate. The next morning, a letter arrived from corporate headquarters. This one was different, short, formal, direct. They requested a meeting with me, offering to cover travel, accommodation, and compensation. They wanted to discuss opportunities for collaboration. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and put it back in the envelope. Melissa asked if I was going to respond. I told her maybe. She looked at me carefully, then said, "You've already won." I didn't argue. She was right. This was never about titles or promotions. It was about proving what silence could do. Later that afternoon, I took a slow drive past the plant again. The parking lot was nearly empty. A chain-link fence had been put up around part of the yard, with signs warning restricted access. I watched for a long moment, then kept driving. The truth was, I didn't belong there anymore. I'd built my life around that place, carried it on my back for years, and walked away without a sound. That silence had destroyed Daniel, exposed the rot, and forced corporate to face reality. The game was over, and I hadn't played by their rules at all. 2 weeks after I'd walked out, I sat in a glass-walled conference room 3 states away. Corporate headquarters looked nothing like the plant I'd spent half my life in. Clean floors, polished desks, suits instead of work boots. But the tension in the room was familiar. Executives shifted in their chairs, eyes darting at me, waiting for me to speak. I didn't. I let them talk first. One of them cleared his throat and said the collapse had been unfortunate. Another called it a transitional failure. A third admitted Daniel had made serious errors in judgment. They threw words around like shields, hoping one might protect them from the truth. Finally, the senior executive leaned forward. He said they were impressed with my record, that I had demonstrated leadership under difficult circumstances. They wanted me back. Not just back, but higher. A new position, oversight of multiple plants, reporting directly to corporate. The salary was generous, the benefits stacked. On paper, it was everything I had once thought I wanted. I listened in silence. Then I reached into my briefcase and set the proof drive on the table. No speeches, no accusations. Just a small black device, sitting between us like a loaded gun. The room went still. They all knew what it meant. Years of records, signatures, falsified logs, all tied to Daniel, but also to their own oversight failures. I didn't have to explain. The weight of it was obvious. I said only one thing. My conditions are in writing. From my briefcase, I pulled a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table. Independent Oversight Authority. Full control of operations under my name. A team of my choosing. And protection from interference, permanent. The senior executive scanned the page, his face tightening with every line. "This is highly irregular," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Irregular was why I was in that room. The silence stretched until one of them shifted uncomfortably and asked, "What happens if we say no?" I looked at the drive still sitting between us. Then I leaned back in my chair. Nothing more needed to be said. They didn't decide that day. But by the end of the week, the offer came in writing. Every condition accepted. Every boundary respected. They didn't want to, but they had no choice. My silence had already written the story. I hadn't just taken back what they owed me. I had reshaped the entire table. On my terms. Quietly. 6 months later, I sat in an office that didn't belong to anyone else before me. The nameplate on the door was new. The authority behind it even newer. Corporate had given me everything I'd asked for. Control over operations, oversight beyond one plant, and most importantly, silence from above. No interference. No second-guessing. Just space to run things the way they should have been run all along. Daniel was gone. Officially, he had resigned for personal reasons. Unofficially, he was finished. The industry was small enough that word spread fast. No company wanted to hire a man whose name was tied to collapse and federal investigation. Last I heard, he was consulting for a small supplier in another state, clinging to relevance like a man stranded in the desert. The plant itself had changed too. Inspections had forced corporate to rebuild entire sections. Old machines replaced, safety systems upgraded, training enforced for every hire. Everything I had asked for years ago but had been denied because it cost too much. Now they were spending 10 times more just to undo the damage of their own arrogance. Sometimes, former coworkers reached out. A few congratulated me quietly, saying they always knew the truth. Others avoided me, maybe out of guilt, maybe because silence unnerves them more than shouting ever could. I didn't blame them. They'd been part of the system too, just trying to survive. Melissa noticed the change in me. I came home earlier now, not burdened by invisible weight. I wasn't fighting fires alone anymore. I wasn't waking up with my jaw clenched, wondering what would break next. She said I seemed lighter, calmer. I told her it wasn't calm, it was control. One afternoon, I received a package at the office. No return address, just a plain box. Inside was a photo frame. The picture was of the plant gates, taken on the day the inspectors arrived. Trucks lined up, workers standing outside. A moment of collapse, frozen in time. No note, no signature. I knew it was from someone who wanted me to remember how far things had fallen without me. I didn't hang it on the wall. I placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, a reminder that silence doesn't just destroy, it reshapes. In meetings now, executives look at me differently. They don't interrupt when I speak. Sometimes, they don't even ask me to speak at all. My presence is enough. They've learned what Daniel never understood. The quiet man at the table often carries the sharpest weapon, and I don't need to swing it. Just holding it is enough. A year after the collapse, I stood on the balcony of a hotel overlooking another city, another plant, another operation that now fell under my authority. From this height, the factory looked like a grid of lights, machines humming in unison, trucks moving in and out with precision. Everything was running smoothly. Everything was under control. And yet, I didn't feel pride. Not exactly. What I felt was something colder. A confirmation. The silence that once weighed on me had become my weapon, my strategy, my armor. Daniel was a ghost by then. His name surfaced occasionally in whispers. Someone would mention him in a story, always as a warning. Don't end up like him. That was his legacy now. Not leadership, not vision. Just failure and collapse. All because he thought I wasn't ready. Sometimes, I thought back to that morning in his office. The smirk on his face, the words he chose. Not ready for promotion. As if the title made the man. As if leadership could be handed out with paperwork. He had no idea that I'd already been carrying the entire operation on my back, and the moment I set it down, everything shattered. Melissa asked me once if I ever missed the plant, the people, the routine of those long days. I told her the truth. No, I didn't miss it. What I missed, if anything, was the silence of those first few nights after I walked away. When I turned my phone face down, shut off the world, and let chaos find its own rhythm. That silence was freedom. Now, in boardrooms and conference calls, executives lean forward when I pause. They wait for my silence, afraid of what might come after it. They know I don't bluff. I don't threaten. I don't need to. I let the quiet stretch, and they fill it with their own fear. I've learned something most men never do. Noise is cheap. Shouting, arguing, demanding, it burns fast and dies faster. But silence lingers. It unsettles. It spreads until the other side can't breathe. I didn't win by shouting Daniel down. I didn't win by demanding what I was owed. I won by leaving, by setting down the weight, by letting his own failures echo louder than any words I could have spoken. Now, when people ask about my story, I don't tell them much. I don't need to. I just say one line. When my boss told me I wasn't ready, I nodded, clocked out, and went home. The rest? The chaos, the downfall, the silence that followed, it speaks for itself. And that silence is still mine. Always will be. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.